Good evening. New emails have just been revealed which expose evidence of how Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci work together to not only suppress scientific debate, but also to suppress the free speech of American scientists. Meanwhile, Procter and Gamble have issued recalls of several dozen of their products following the discovery that they contained a cancer-causing carcinogen. And this is actually the 8th time that such a recall has happened this year. In fact, just several months ago, Johnson & Johnson had to recall several of their previously FDA-approved sunscreens because they likewise contained benzene. And then lastly, according to a new government report, at a minimum, $100 billion has been stolen from COVID relief programs that were set up by the government. Let's go through it all together. This is your daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman, from the Epoch Times. And now let's begin today's discussion by talking about the freedom of speech. Now imagine this for a quick moment. You are a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. You see the pandemic playing out in the world, and you have your own opinions on it based on your own scientific background from years of doing scientific research. However, unbeknownst to you, forces within the government are actively conspiring to quickly and devastatingly take you down. Well, it looks like that is exactly what happened here in America, because newly released emails from the NIH, they show that the government was doing exactly that. Now, to start with, this is the main email in question. It was sent in October of 2020, and it came from Dr. Collins, who is the head of the NIH, addressed to Dr. Fauci. And before we read what was said in the actual email itself, let me give you a bit of context around what was happening at that time. Around that time, you might remember that Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci, they were pushing a new round of COVID lockdowns. However, at that very same time, there was a group of epidemiologists as well as public health scientists who got together and they published something known as the Great Barrington Declaration. That declaration, it was essentially a letter that ran counter to the efforts of the government, specifically of Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, by declaring a unified opposition to broad-based lockdowns. Instead, the Great Barrington Declaration, it argued that instead of lockdowns, we should be focused on the protection of vulnerable groups. And this declaration, it gained a lot of traction. In fact, hundreds of thousands of people signed it across the world, including many notable medical doctors as well as scientists. And so that's the general background for this email. Because amidst all this, as the government is pushing for more lockdowns and a group of doctors and scientists is arguing against lockdowns, here's what Dr. Collins wrote to Dr. Fauci. Quote, "This proposal from the 3 fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary seems to be getting a lot of attention, and even a co-signature from Nobel Prize winner Mike Levitt from Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway?" Now think about that for a quick moment. The director of the National Institutes of Health in this email issues a directive to his subordinates to silence American scientists and take them down. And it appears that Dr. Fauci was in full agreement to both take down the authors as well as their declaration. That's because he replied to Dr. Collins with a very short reply which said this, quote, "I am pasting in below a piece from The Wired that debunks this theory." And then below that message, you can see an article from a publication called Wired. However, if you actually read that particular article, you'd find that it was essentially an op-ed which castigated the declaration, but it didn't really offer any fundamental scientific rebuttal. However, Dr. Fauci's chief of staff, a man by the name of Greg Falkers, he sent Dr. Fauci a list of additional political op-eds which likewise had the same anti-Great Barrington Declaration talking points. However, just as with the piece from The Wired, those op-eds, by and large, lacked any scientific basis or facts. Now, you might disagree with me on that last point, and so what I'll do is I'll throw the links to those articles into the description box below this video so you can read them for yourself and make your own decision. Regardless, though, here is where the story becomes dystopian. Because within a day of that first email, the first email which came from Dr. Collins, Google began to censor the search results for Great Barrington Declaration. Now, the big question is whether that was just a coincidence of timing or this was an aspect of the quick and devastating takedown that Dr. Collins requested. And here's the thing. It's actually not clear. Because although there has already been a lot of established precedent for social media companies essentially enacting the government's censorship, it's all very opaque. It's done behind the scenes. Regardless, here is what one of the main authors of the Great Barrington Declaration wrote on Twitter after these emails were made public. "So now I know what it feels like to be the subject of a propaganda attack by my own government. Discussion and engagement would have been a better path." And although these new emails shed some light on how the government tried to shut down debate in this instance, this is not the first time that such a thing has come to light during the pandemic. In fact, there was a previous episode regarding the lab leak theory, which played out in very similar fashion. What happened back then was on February the 1st of 2020, there was a secret teleconference that was held among high-level health officials. And during that teleconference, there were two main presenters who made clear to the group that they believed that it was highly likely that COVID had originated from a Wuhan lab. Now, one of the presenters, it was a man named Christian Anderson, who works at the Scripps Research Institute, and he told the group that he was, quote, 60 to 70% sure that the virus had come from a laboratory. And then the other presenter, Mr. Edward Holmes, who was a scientist who worked both for and with the head of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention between 2014 and 2020, he told the teleconference that he was 80% sure that the virus came out of a lab. However, here's where things get a little weird, because even though those two presenters during that teleconference said what they said, they were, at the very same time, working on an article, which was later known as proximal origin, and that article, it publicly promoted the natural origin theory, and it dismissed any lab leak theories. Then that article, it was used by both Dr. Fauci as well as a lot of the corporate media outlets to both push the natural origin theory, while at the same time dismissing the lab leak theory. Now, after that secret teleconference, there were emails that were sent among the attendees, which made repeated references to the possibility of a meeting that was to be held with the head of the WHO, Mr. Tedros. In fact, during that time, Dr. Collins, who was again the head of the NIH, he sent an email to Dr. Fauci, which said this: I can make myself available at any time 24/7 for the call with Tedros. And then on February 2nd of 2020, which was again the day right after that secret teleconference, Mr. Jeremy Farrar, who was the British Pharmaceutical Trust Director, he emailed Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci telling them that, quote, Tedros needs to decide today. And in that email, right below the message, Mr. Farrar included a link to an article that had just been published on Zero Hedge, which discussed the possibility that the virus had come from a lab in Wuhan. Now, subsequently, we of course don't know what the contents of the meeting were between Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, and Dr. Tedros, but what we do know is that on the very next day, February the 3rd, Dr. Tedros from the WHO, he issued his report of the Director General, which included a call to, quote, combat the spread of rumors and misinformation. And while he was presenting that report, here's what he said. We have worked with Google to make sure people searching for information about coronavirus see WHO information at the top of their search results. Social media platforms including Twitter, Facebook, Tencent, and TikTok have also taken steps to limit the spread of misinformation. And wouldn't you believe, on the very same day that Dr. Tedros made that speech, Zero Hedge was banned from Twitter. And that ban remained in place for about 5 months, at which point Twitter came out and they said that they had made an error and reinstated their account. And so it appears to be that this is how the game is played. But luckily, we do have the Freedom of Information Act, which allows us to at least get a cursory glimpse into what is happening behind the scenes. If you'd like to read more about this email thread, which was just recently uncovered, or about that earlier takedown of Zero Hedge from Twitter, I'll throw all those links into the description box below this video for you to check out for yourself. And all I ask in return is that you take a super quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, before we move on over and discuss some recent cancer-causing FDA recalls, I would like to take a quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, which I'll do from the sound booth. That's right, Roman. The sponsor of today's episode is an awesome company called AMAC. That's AMAC, and it stands for the Association of Mature American Citizens. Now, what I learned earlier today, though, is that you don't actually need to be a mature American citizen yourself in order to join AMAC, because even though they're an organization that's geared towards people who are 50 years of age and above, you can actually join at any age as long as you're a American-loving patriot. And so what they say is that as our fundamental freedoms here in this country are being threatened by politicians who don't even necessarily know how to balance their own checking accounts, and as there is a concerted effort to censor conservatives by this woke ideology, one thing that you can do to fight back is to join the 2 million people who are already members of AMAC. And by joining, you'll have access to 3 main benefits. The first benefit is the money-saving benefit, because by joining, you'll have access to discounts on things like vitamins, restaurants, retail shops throughout the entire country. Second of all, you will gain access to the AMAC website, the AMAC app, as well as the AMAC magazine, which gives you something that the mainstream media doesn't, which is honest news that is grounded in facts. And third of all, and this is what a lot of people say is their favorite benefit, is that AMAC has your back over on Capitol Hill. Because with 2 million freedom-loving members, they are a voice for conservatives that cannot be ignored. And so if you are a person who considers themselves a constitutional conservative, then I would consider joining AMAC. You can do so over at amac.us. That's amac.us. So consider signing up, consider helping AMAC's effort, and getting access to these excellent membership benefits. So AMAC, thank you so much for sponsoring this episode. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's talk about cancer-causing recalls. 6 days ago, Procter and Gamble issued a voluntary recall of 32 of their aerosol-based hair products. And the reason for that recall is that benzene, which is of course a chemical linked to cancer, was detected in those particular products. Now, to be specific, Procter and Gamble, as you might very well know, owns a lot of different brands. And so this recall, it affects several different hair products that you would find on a supermarket shelf, including brands such as Pantene, Herbal Essence, Aussie, Waterless, Secret, Hair Food, as well as Old Spice. Now, benzene is typically either a colorless or a light yellow liquid chemical that is highly flammable. And in humans, benzene has been shown to cause cells to not work properly, and it can lead to many different things, such as dizziness, irregular heartbeats, convulsions, or if you're exposed to it for a long period of time, it can also cause leukemia, anemia, as well as other forms of cancer. Now, you might be wondering, how is it exactly that a product that was approved to be on store shelves and to be used on your skin wound up being produced with benzene in the bottle? Well, here's how Procter & Gamble explained the situation in a corporate statement. Following recent reports that indicated traces of benzene in some aerosol spray products, we began a review of our total portfolio of aerosol products. While benzene is not an ingredient in any of our products, our review showed that unexpected levels of benzene came from the propellant that sprays the product out of the can. We detected benzene in aerosol dry shampoo spray products and aerosol dry conditioner spray products. And so, according to the statement at least, it appears that what happened was that while they did not put benzene as an ingredient in their shampoo and their conditioners, in the actual formulation, it was present in the aerosol propellant, which actually sprays the stuff out of the can. Which is kind of amazing if you think about it, that you can have such a widely used and ubiquitous product that's literally available everywhere across the country, but it's unknowingly showering you with cancer-causing chemicals. Now, the affected products are currently being removed from store shelves across the entire country, and Americans are asked to immediately stop using these products if they have them at home. In fact, Procter & Gamble set up a reimbursement program where you can actually get your money back if you purchased any of these products previously. Just for your convenience, I'll actually throw a link to in the description box to a full list of all the products that are covered under this particular recall. It'll be down there in the description box below. Also, it is worth noting that thus far, Procter & Gamble has reportedly not received any reports of adverse reactions to these products. Allegedly, what happened was that they conducted these tests, they found benzene, and then they issued the recall. However, this type of recall is not necessarily an isolated incident. In fact, so far this year, there have been a total of 8 different benzene-related spray product recalls that were announced by the FDA. And one of them, I believe at least, is worth highlighting, and that is the case of the Johnson & Johnson sunscreen recall. What happened was that about 6 months ago, so back in July, Johnson & Johnson issued a recall of several of their sunscreen sprays. The reason being, just like with Procter & Gamble, they conducted internal testing and they discovered low levels of benzene within these products. And so they issued a recall, with many nationwide retailers taking the Johnson & Johnson sprays off the shelves. However, not everything went smoothly, because lawsuits began to spring up across the country against both Johnson & Johnson as well as Costco, because Costco was selling these particular products. And just last month, they settled these lawsuits, although the details have yet to be made public. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to Johnson & Johnson for comment on the tentative agreement in these lawsuit settlements, and here's the statement that they emailed back to us. This agreement, which is subject to court approval, is not an admission of liability or wrongdoing. We strongly dispute the merits of these lawsuits and stand behind our position that we marketed our sunscreen products appropriately and responsibly. Now, it is true that they voluntarily issued the recall against their own products, but it is also amazing to consider the fact that an FDA-approved product like these sunscreens, because sunscreens need to be FDA approved in order to be on the store shelves, it's amazing that they can be sold across the entire nation and in some of America's largest stores, but then later be discovered to contain a cancer-causing carcinogen. That's really rather amazing if you think about it. If you'd actually like to read more about the details of this Johnson & Johnson sunscreen recall, I'll throw those into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a quick moment to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. And now, let's move on over and talk about the pandemic relief money. And to start with, have you ever listened to young people talk about how we need more government-funded programs in this country? And as you're listening to them talk about it, how the government needs to take over let's say, a function that's currently being handled by the private sector, and you hear them and you think to yourself, gosh, would the government really be more efficient at this particular task? Or would they be more likely to lose $100 billion without even knowing where it went? Well, it appears that the answer to that question has been settled. Because according to estimates that were just released by the Secret Service, at a minimum, $100 billion have been stolen from COVID relief programs that were set up by the government to help both businesses as well as private citizens who lost their jobs due to the pandemic. Now, to start with, if you're like me, you might be wondering and asking yourself why exactly the Secret Service is the one that's conducting this investigation. Shouldn't they be busy guarding the president? And it turns out that the reason for this, and I didn't know this before looking it up, but the Secret Service, they actually specialize in financial fraud in addition to their better known role of protecting the president. In fact, they recently even appointed a new National Pandemic Fraud Recovery Coordinator in order to oversee and coordinate all of these investigations. And that man, by the way, is named Roy Dodson. Now, in terms of what they've actually found, the details are quite stark. 2 days ago, Mr. Dodson, he announced that based on their assessment from data from the Labor Department as well as from the Small Business Administration, criminals have stolen at a minimum $100 billion in pandemic relief funds. Which sounds like a lot, which it is. However, consider that that number only represents about 3% of the total $3.4 trillion that were dispersed by the government. Here's in fact what Mr. Dodson said in a statement. I have been in law enforcement for over 29 years and worked some complex fraud investigations for 20 plus years, and have never seen something at this scale. Furthermore, during an interview with CNBC, Mr. Dodson said that the ease of obtaining these funds has made fraud a significantly easier enterprise for criminals to commit. Here's specifically what he said on this front. There's no doubt that the programs were easily accessible online. And so, with that comes the opportunity for bad actors to get into that mix. It was necessary to try to get these funds out to people that were truly hurting and no fault of anybody. Regardless, though, he also said that at this very moment, the Secret Service has about 900 active investigations that they're looking into in terms of fraud. Here's what he said, quote, "It is a wide range because the pot was so big. You not only have your typical transnational organized groups and domestic organized groups, criminal groups, but you have individuals that decided to take advantage of that. So there's many different patterns and investigative intelligence that we developed that I can't really go into. But we've mapped out kind of some of the different characteristics of different groups." Now, this announcement from the Secret Service actually falls very much in line with what the Labor Department released in a statement back in March. Back then, the Labor Department's Inspector General, he released a report in which he said that at least $89 billion of the estimated $896 billion in unemployment program funds could have been, quote, paid improperly with a significant portion attributable to fraud. Now, in terms of actually retrieving this money, well, last week, the Justice Department came out and they said that their fraud division, they have already prosecuted 150 defendants in over 95 different criminal cases, and that they have seized in total over $75 million in cash, which they claim came from this type of COVID relief fund fraud. Which sounds all well and good, but consider that $75 million is a far cry from $100 billion. Here's in fact what Mr. Roy Dodson said on this front. Can we stop fraud? Will we? No. But I think we can definitely prosecute those that need to be prosecuted, and we can do our best to recover as much fraudulent pandemic funds that we can. Although one thing that Mr. Dodson did not elaborate on is how much it will actually cost the government to both investigate as well as prosecute all of these fraud cases. And frankly, it's exactly stories like these that make me question why I pay taxes at all. Regardless, if you'd like to read more about these fraud investigations that are currently being undertaken by the Secret Service, I'll throw the links to several articles into the description box below this video for you to check out. And all I ask in return is that you take a quick moment, if you haven't already, to smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Now, since you've completed this episode of Facts Matter, I would highly recommend that you go on over to Epoch TV and check out an awesome episode of Truth Over News where Jeff and Hans expose how the Lancet Medical Journal, they pushed a Chinese communist-driven narrative around the natural origins of the virus and shut down scientific debate. Here's a trailer for that episode.
When members of Anthony Fauci's group wanted to push their natural origin narrative early in the pandemic, they chose the renowned Lancet Journal as their outlet. EcoHealth's Peter Daszak penned the group's Lancet letter, which strongly condemned the Wuhan lab leak theory and effectively shut down any scientific debate. The Lancet letter immediately became the media's main reference point for pushing the natural origin narrative. What the Lancet failed to disclose was Daszak's many conflicts of interest, including the fact that EcoHealth was the conduit used by Fauci to provide funding for gain-of-function experiments at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. During testimony in British Parliament last week, Richard Horton, the editor-in-chief of The Lancet, tried to explain his dealings with Daszak and the reasoning behind the publication of the Lancet letter. It did not go well for him.
If you'd like to check out that phenomenal episode, as well as all the other great content over on Epoch TV, I'll throw a link to it. It'll be right there at the very top of the description box. I hope you click on it. Hope you check it out. I hope you subscribe. And I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful, beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. And lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also consider hitting that notification bell so you can actually be notified of any new videos as we release them. And then lastly, if you have a Telegram account, consider following me at factsmatter_Roman. I publish the links to all my videos, so if anything ever happens here on YouTube, you will always be able to find our episodes on Telegram. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.